and I'm going to be talking about behaviour and how what we do at HSL in terms of behaviour change fits in with what we do in terms of the safety climate tool. I think it's a good point to just start off with a definition of behaviour, because if you're talking about behaviour, if you think about it, it can be quite a nebulous concept actually. It can be, you can get yourself all tied up in knots thinking about it. So really a nice simple definition for behaviour is behaviour describes our actions or our reactions, and that's generally in relation to the environment, what's going on around us, either the physical environment or the social environment. So it's something that you can actually see somebody do. We now talk of behaviour in terms of what's known as the dual system. So for those of you that have heard of Daniel Kahneman, he's got a very good book called Thinking Fast and Slow that talks about this dual system of behaviour. So on the one hand, we've got the automatic system of behaviour, and that's influenced very heavily by our biases, our habits, the emotional state that we're perhaps in at that time. And then on the other hand, we have the reflective system of behaviour, and that's the more deliberate, thought-through system of behaviour. So that's influenced by our conscious intentions, the decisions that we formulate, sets of beliefs that we hold, the goals that we set ourselves, and the plans that we formulate to get there. A good analogy for that is a journey. If you think about your typical commute to work in the morning, if it's a common occurrence for you, I go to work in Buxton, get in the car at the house, get out again in Buxton 45 minutes later. In the interim period, other than listen to Chris Evans on the radio, not overly sure what I'm doing. There's no sort of conscious, I get to the roundabout, I've got to take the third exit, I get to the dual carriageway, I have to take the slip road. It's all very habitual, very automatic. Whereas my journey this morning was very planned, very thought out, despite all the spanners in the works. There was loads of that, I've got to be here at such and such a time, how am I going to get there, what trains do I get, what tubes do I get? Very deliberate, very conscious. So essentially the same behaviour, commuting, but influenced by those different systems. And those two systems do interplay with each other, because the automatic system is the system that generates the gut feelings, if you like, the impressions that can form the source of the conscious decisions that we make, the impressions that we have. So they do interplay, they're not completely separated. Okay, so behaviour change then is generally any intervention that affects either the frequency or the type of behaviour being carried out. And that's usually by altering the contributors to that behaviour or the consequences, the things that happen after it that will either reinforce or decrease the chance of that behaviour happening again. In general, people will change their behaviour based on other changes. So that's either changes in the world around us, changes in our perception or our understanding of the world, or changes within ourselves, changes within our attitudes, our values, our beliefs. And those changes will generally make that new behaviour, perhaps it makes it more advantageous, and certainly in the fields of health and safety, that's a big one. If you can make the healthy and safe way of working the most beneficial for the individual, the quickest, the easiest, the most convenient for them, then you're on a winner. So if it's more advantageous, if it's more me, if it aligns with what I believe about myself, what my values are, what my identity is, what I believe my responsibilities are. If it's more prevalent, that's another big one, fitting in with the social norms, fitting in with what everybody else around us is doing. If everybody else is behaving safely, then I'm more likely to behave safely as well. And then more doable. As I said, if you can make it convenient, easy for them to do, then it's more likely to be changed. Okay, so why we focus on behaviour? Well, we know you'll all be familiar, I would assume, with this Bradley curve. So we know that we've got those residual behaviour-related risk factors that, you know, we've tried everything, we've tried to engineer them out, design them out, manage them out, but we have these residual factors. And it is those factors that form the focus of behavioural change programmes, behavioural interventions. Okay, so just very quickly thinking about what traditional behavioural safety programmes look like. So those of you that may be familiar with things like behavioural modification, behavioural observation programmes, DuPont's STOP programme as an example, that's a commonly known one. I just want to draw you to these constructs that influence our behaviour. So we have our beliefs. Those are how we think things are in the world. And our beliefs are formed as a function of direct observation and learning. And our beliefs feed into our values. And that's essentially how we think things ought to be, how we think I ought to behave, other people ought to behave. Often when you ask people about values, they'll say things like trust, integrity, respect, those sorts of things. And then equally, we also underpinning the attitudes, the beliefs and values underpin our attitudes. And those are essentially the judgments that we make about things, so whether we view something positively or negatively. So in the past, safety training and safety campaigns often used to focus upon changing people's attitudes, in the hope that that would change their subsequent behaviour. So the underlying assumption being that attitudes cause behaviour. But although they are linked, that causal link is actually quite weak. Because if you think about it, our attitudes can be inconsistent with the behaviours that we exhibit. If you go into a restaurant and you have a rubbish service, the food's late coming, it's cold, it's not very pleasant, how many of you at the end of the service, when the waiter comes up and says, was everything all right? Most of you will go, yeah, it's fine, it's great. So that behaviour is not consistent with the attitude that you've had a negative experience. So there can be inconsistencies, because other things, for example, you don't want your peers to think of you badly because you're complaining, can get in the way. So that causal link isn't straightforward. So behavioural observation programmes, what they thought was work on the premise of if you change the behaviour first, then actually what you can do by enforcing that new behaviour on individuals, by watching them, observing them, then actually what happens over time is it creates what's called cognitive dissonance, which is an unrest in people's heads, and we don't like that. We like things to be in symmetry as much as we can. So what you find that people then do is they'll then change their attitude to be consistent with that new behaviour that's being enforced upon them, to bring things into line. So these behavioural observation programmes say change behaviours first. And generally, this is a very simplistic view of them, generally they'll do it through a form of defining the safe and unsafe behaviours, so they'll have clearly defined criteria for each of these, upon which they'll develop checklists. They'll train observers to go out and observe various behaviours in the workplace, and then they reinforce the safe behaviours through a loop of feedback. So that's praise, recognition, which is actually the most powerful reinforcement. In some programmes it could be tokens, it could be bonuses, it could be monetary rewards, some other form of tangible reward. It depends upon the programme. And they continue on this cyclical loop. Constructive feedback for the unsafe behaviours. However, if you think about it, how do you behave if you know you're being observed? So if you know you're being observed, when you approach a speed camera, what do a lot of people in the population do? Slow down, absolutely. And yet when you're out of the eyes of the speed camera, you speed up again. So when you know you're being observed and you know you're being audited on it, then you're more likely to comply with the behaviour. However, I'm not doing these programmes down. They do have merit and they can work. But what we are saying is that they don't tend to tackle the root causes of problems. They're very context and problem specific, and they have to be because they're focusing on observable behaviours. They do have merit, but what we would say is think of them as one tool in a toolbox of behaviour change techniques. Don't rely on them solely. What we say is actually, rather than just focusing on the behaviour or just focusing on the attitude in terms of safety campaigns, posters, those kinds of things, what you actually want to do is you want to think about people's beliefs, people's values, as well as their attitudes and behaviours. That's going to give you a much more holistic, integrated behaviour change programme if you can address all of these. Okay, so what do contemporary approaches look like? We've done a lot of work in this field. I was heavily involved in the team that developed the HSE's Leadership and Worker Involvement Toolkit for the construction industry. And when we developed that toolkit, I think it was launched about 2 years ago now, we very much recognised that what you need is this holistic approach, this top-down and bottom-up approach. So the top-down approach to help you address the root causes, things like the safety climate, the safety culture, leadership behaviours, but equally the bottom-up approach as well. So focusing on what's driving and motivating individuals and the kind of decision-making processes that they have. And surrounding it all, we're encompassing worker involvement. And as Caroline said, one of the beauties of the safety climate tool is it gives you that mechanism to engage with your workforce. And from our experience, worker engagement is what will drive a behaviour change programme forward in your organisation. Because these are the guys that are best placed to identify the hazards accurately for you. These are the guys that are also best placed often to generate practical and realistic solutions. And if they're not involved in the generation of the solutions, then they're less likely to want to use them. So worker involvement is absolutely key. HSL's approach to behaviour change. This is quite hot off the press. This is our new model. It's called the Make It Happen model. It's an amended version of, there's a leading light in the field of health psychology who's done health psychology. A lot of the work of behaviour change has come from the field of health psychology. And there's a lady called Professor Susan Mickey that works at UCL in London, and she's the leading light in health psychology and behaviour change, and she has what's called a COM-B model, which is the capability, opportunity and motivation model. Now, a lot of Susan's work is very heavily done more in terms of things like health promotion, public health, and individual behaviour change as well. And what we've done is we've taken that COM-B model and we've adjusted it to make it fit within an organisational situation. So this is our Make It Happen model, and I'll talk you through each of the steps. On the top hand, we've got the can happen, and we've got number one there for in terms of the physical context. So that's about getting the right physical environment. That's about giving your individuals the opportunity to behave safely by providing them with the right physical environment. Then we've got the social context. So that's about giving them the right social environment in terms of the right safety culture, in terms of the right leadership, visible management commitment, peer support, those sorts of things. Then in number three, we've got able to happen. So that's about giving them the right capabilities in terms of the right skills and the right knowledge that they need to perform safely and healthily. And then we've got the want to happen, and that's acting on that dual system of behaviour. So the reflective system in terms of the think it through, the conscious intentions, the decisions, the beliefs that we have, and then the automatic system of behaviour in terms of the things like biases, habits, emotional influences. So hopefully you can see that this model is encompassing the myriad of influences that impact upon an individual that lead up to them behaving in a particular way. And the model fits in as well with the safety climate tool. You know, it fits in neatly with the factors that Caroline's been discussing this morning as well. So the two support each other. This is just an example of the kinds of things that I'm going to be running through some of them, but for particular the thing about behaviour change is I cannot give you a definitive list of these are the interventions that you need to go away and do in your organisation. It is very much about tailoring it to suit your organisation, to suit the climate that you have at the time as well. So again, one of the beauties of running the safety climate tool is to assess at what level of maturity you're at to help you tailor the interventions that you have. But this is just an example of how you can develop a table of interventions. So for example, Act on Social Environment is about increasing worker involvement, getting team cohesion, those sorts of things. So it's an example of the kind of interventions, but I'll talk more about those in a second. Okay, from our experience of talking to organisations, and I deliver training on behaviour change, our experience is that organisations, they like a structure, they like a step-by-step approach often. So what we've done is we've very much formatted the behaviour change approach into a structure. And it's very similar to almost like a 5-step risk assessment process, if you like, that is very familiar and very well known and accepted within organisations. And I'm going to take you through each of these steps. The safety climate tool very much fits in step 1, which is the preparation, which is where you can run the safety climate tool to identify where you are. Equally, it fits in step 2, but more of an issue identification. So you don't run it in step 1, you could run it then. Also fits in step 3 when you're doing your root cause analysis, because that's where the focus groups that follow on from running your safety climate tool would fit in. And then again, it fits in step 5 equally as well, which is when you assess your performance, you monitor how well you've done or not, as the case may be, and think about what you need to do to maintain your performance. And the Make It Happen model that I've just described, that would sit in step 3, which is in addition to doing the root cause analysis that I'm sure you all do within your organisations, and you've got a variety of fancy tools, fishbone techniques, etc., etc., The root cause analysis, we would say, is also about having a very clear understanding of something like the Make It Happen model, the influences, the myriad of influences on an individual's behaviour. So who are the key individuals in your organisation that would need to have that understanding? And it fits in step 4, which is where we map it onto the interventions. Okay, so preparation. From our experience, this is where we found that organisations often fall down. They'll launch into running a programme and they actually haven't done the groundwork, they haven't done the preparation underneath. So we would say to you, you really need to think about your preparation beforehand. Think about what you need to have in place. Senior management commitment to the process is absolutely key. If you haven't got that senior management buy-in, then you're not going to get anywhere. Absolutely not. Again, I can't tell you what's going to get that buy-in for your senior management, but I can tell you that one of the business, the legal, or the moral case will work. One of them will work. Generally, it has to be said, it's usually the business case, but not always. If I think about our chief executive, I could very much hand on heart say that it's the moral case for him. You'd hope that that would be the case, it's health and safety laboratory, but it very much is. So there will be one, and it's just a case of finding it. But as I say, usually it's the business case. Setting up a project management group before you start as well to run your approach. And the key thing about your project management group, I would say, is you want your behavioural change approach to be an organisational-wide initiative. Therefore, you want an organisational-wide project group. You want a representative from every member of your organisation. So you want your senior management, you want HR, you want OC Health, you want a workers' representative, you want the trade union if that's appropriate, you want somebody from marketing and communications if that's possible, because you want to launch and communicate this project throughout your organisation. So think very carefully about the fact that you're encompassing everybody you would possibly need. You don't have to have them all meeting together every time you have a meeting, but certainly at the first meeting and then again at appropriate points. So everybody with clearly designated roles and responsibilities as well. And then worker engagement, consulting with them, having their representatives on the project group and consulting with them what you're going to do. Okay, so just some ideas. What we would say is what you want a project plan at the very start as well, and that needs to be communicated because that's giving a visible commitment that actually you're going to be doing something about this. So you want to be covering the 5-step process or whatever format, whatever structure you're putting it in. You don't have to follow our 5 steps. You want to be thinking very clearly about what your vision is. What's the reason? Why are you doing this program? Because again, from our experience, organisations put these types of programs in and they don't give out a clear message as to why they're doing it. So you want to think very clearly about your vision. If it's like everybody goes home safely or, healthy, happy here, whatever it may be. But when you're coming up with your vision, think about, we can all come up with neat, fancy strap lines. They mean nothing if you think about it. You need to also think about the behaviours that underpin that vision as well. So don't just come up with a neat, fancy strap line and communicate that. You want to be thinking about your health and safety policies, your OC health policies. Do they need revising? Do they need behavioural input? And on the leadership and worker involvement toolkit, I think it's step 2, there is an example of a health and safety policy that we took from a principal contractor in construction. And it's brilliant because it's got very clear behavioural outcomes and behavioural statements in it. And what we've done is we've identified where they are and given a bit of a write-up about it. So yeah, I would suggest you have a look at that. Resources, making sure you've got adequate resources to cover your programme and communicating to your staff. And making it fit with what you do in your daily business management as well. The best behavioural change programmes are those that aren't run in a silo but are actually perceived as part and parcel of the daily business and the daily health and safety management. So think about what you can do to make that the case. Safety climate assessment, so that could be something that you could do at the preparation stage as well to identify where you are. You don't have to do it here, but you could do. Equally, you could do the safety climate in step 2, which is your issue identification process. Again, from our experience, what we found is that lots of organisations, they collect a plethora of data. They've got, all these data sources that they collect weekly or monthly, and then actually, what does it actually tell them? What value is it to them? Often not, because it's not analysed properly, it's not communicated back, it's not acted upon. So what we would say is, think about having a funneling system for your data collection, for your behavioural change programme. Remember I said about the importance of setting your vision or your mission? So if, for example, your vision is everyone goes home safely at the end of every day, then think about, okay, well, what KPIs, what key performance indicators, what objectives are going to help, what would aim towards that? Well, clearly one of them is going to be to reduce accidents or incidents. Okay, and then think about what 2 or 3 key data sources, you only need 2 or 3 key data sources to determine whether or not you're moving towards meeting that KPI. We would say try and make sure you've got, in those 2 or 3, have a mix of quantitative and qualitative, so the numerical accident stats, the qualitative accident reports, those kinds of things. Have that mix, and a mix of proactive and reactive measures as well, if you can, across your data sources. Then what you want to be doing is reviewing your data sources with reference back to your KPI. What is this telling me? Is it telling me that I'm moving towards meeting it or not? And then from your data sources, that's also going to help identify behaviours, the hazards, the risks, particular hotspots, whether it's particular departments, particular groups of workers or managers. But equally, I would say pay attention to the areas of good practice in your data as well. Don't just look for the hotspots. The good practice is what you can learn from and what you can pass on to other areas of your business. So don't just do it in looking for the hotspots. Step 3 in the process is about the root cause analysis. So, as I said, I'm going to talk about the model and the interventions you can put in place, but from the Make It Happen model, you can already start to see we've got to address the physical environment, the social environment, the capabilities, the knowledge, the automatic drivers on behaviour. So part of your root cause analysis is the key individuals having a good understanding that there are a myriad of influences upon our workers and our managers in our businesses. And again, worker involvement, making sure that whatever root cause analysis strategy you use, that you have your workers involved in it. Now, I'm sure that you all do, as I said, you all have your own form of root cause analysis, but some of the things that we would say, so tying in with the safety climate tool process, focus groups, interviews, they can yield some fantastic data for you. And what I would say is when you're running your focus groups, though, don't just be focusing on the problems, on the issues. You want to be finishing up your focus groups with, let's start thinking about identifying some solutions. What can we put into place here? So you're not having people coming away thinking, oh God, it's rubbish here, it's really bad, it's really unsafe. You want to get them thinking about the positive things that they can do. So don't just run focus groups in a negative way. 5 whys, are you familiar with the 5 whys? A few of you not. That's a technique that's used a lot in construction, and it's very simplistic. Again, there's an example of this on the leadership and worker involvement toolkit. It's just a case of asking why. So why did the worker fall off the ladder? Because he wasn't maintaining 3 points of contact. Why wasn't he maintaining 3 points of contact? Because there wasn't a procedure in place. Why wasn't there a procedure in place? And you just work down until you get to the root cause. 5 is just an arbitrary number. It could be 3, it could be 10, however many it takes you to get to it. But it's a really nice, simplistic technique that you can use. Things like ABC analysis, so that's an analysis that looks at the activators, the antecedents, and the influences that lead up to a behaviour happening, and then the consequences, things that happen after it that are either going to increase or decrease the chance of it happening again. That's a technique that's used a lot in behavioural modification and observation programmes, and that is a good technique because your aim is to reduce or remove the activators and the consequences of the unsafe behaviour and increase or promote the activators and the consequences of the safe behaviour. So that's a good technique. And just things like informal, just safety walkabouts, having discussions with your operatives and your supervisors and your managers. Just that informal chat, that can often yield some very good information. That can give you a feel for what's going on. Okay, so step 4, the actual putting interventions into place. That's where what you would do is you would develop an action plan, and in the action plan you would draw on the information that you've identified in step 2, in your data gathering exercise, and also in step 3, so in your root cause analysis. And what you need to be drawing on is you need to be drawing also on suggestions that your project management group may have come up with, but equally you need to be drawing on the workers' suggestions, the workers' proposals and ideas. And these are just some of the key areas that we need to address that come under that can happen, make it happen, and able to happen. So the support that individuals receive, the knowledge that they have, whether or not they're aware of their personal susceptibility to the risk, the skills that they have, whether or not they can plan ahead of time, because there's a lot of research that has been done on what's called implementation intentions, and that's essentially the name given for the plan that somebody forms in their head leading up to changing a behaviour. And the research has shown that people that formulate plans, so what they're going to change, when they're going to change it, how they're going to change it, and why they're going to change it, are more likely to succeed. And we can help our workers and our managers plan in the workplace. And then maintaining what you're going to do to maintain your approach. What I would say is, in any action plans that you develop, you should be aiming for a mix of short-term and longer-term interventions. I wouldn't say there aren't any quick wins for behaviour change, because there are a couple, and I'm going to flag up a couple as I go on. But you also have to appreciate that for a whole behaviour change programme, you're looking at about 18 months to 24 months to start seeing some embedded, sustained change. So you do have to be in it for the long haul, but there are things you can do in the shorter term period that can help keep that motivation, keep that morale going. So you want to be looking for a mix. Okay, so in terms of the model, in terms of can happen, so remember that's about the environment, the right environment for your individuals. So organisational values. How many of you could say that, whatever, say for example, it's consistently prioritises worker welfare over productivity? What are the actual behaviours that underpin that? If I go to a worker and say, we consistently prioritise your safety, how do we do that? Are they going to be saying, oh well, they do this, they do that, they do the other? You know, for example, at HSL, if we have snow, which we do a lot in Buxton, the lab gets closed, we get sent home, or the lab doesn't get opened at all. So we know that our health and safety is being prioritised. So there are actions that we could say, yes, senior management do this. So I want you to think about your own organisations, think about your values, and think about what your workers would say if I asked them that question. So these are just a list of some of the ones that you typically find. They're generally quite generic as well, actually. And again, that's often quite what happens. Oh, well, that one looks good, we'll take that one, and that one looks good, we'll take that one. So I want you to really go back and think about it, think about your values and how you demonstrate them. In terms of physical support, so that's about thinking about the processes and the procedures that you have in place. And generally, to be fair, actually, in terms of physical support, most organisations do really well. You know, if you think about that's about the designing out, the managing out, the engineering out. So actually, most folk do pretty well on that. So things like, you know, if you've got health surveillance programmes in place, is it available? Is it accessible to them? Do they know how to access it? Is it good quality? Is it appropriate? Think about those sorts of things. Risk assessments, involving your workers in risk assessments, drafting method statements, those kinds of things, that's absolutely key, we would say. Root cause analysis, sufficient staff and resources, and things like task analysis as well. You know, if it's a complex task that you're asking individuals to do, perhaps you need to go away and do a task analysis or a job analysis, breaking it down into the sub-components to help identify the safety critical parts, to help identify perhaps the parts where behaviours may lapse. So if you don't already do it, think about task analysis or a job analysis. But as I say, generally organisations are pretty good at that. Policy and procedures, so review that with your staff. And thinking about your accident and incident investigation, again, is it of good quality, is it prompt, and is it fed back and communicated as well to the appropriate individuals? So just some of the key things to think about. But as I say, most organisations do quite well on this. In terms of the job environment, Available, accessible, well-maintained and comfortable PPE, for example, comfortable tools and equipment. And again, that's a big one. In my experience, things like PPE, I did some work with poultry workers a few years ago, and they weren't wearing their RPE, and they were exposing themselves to all the various lovely things that are in poultry dust. And actually one of the biggest things for them was just the masks were uncomfortable. They were working in a hot, sweaty, confined environment. The masks got sweaty very quickly, very itchy and scratchy on their skin, and the main reason for them not using them was lack of comfort. Equally, accessibility. These guys would wander around from farm to farm, and equally they get to a farm on the day and they wouldn't know where the PPE was. It wouldn't be pointed out to them. So something as simple as that can be really important. And do you give your workers input into the selection of PPE and equipment as well? Sometimes if all it is just giving somebody the choice of 2 safety boots, you're not giving them a choice of 15, just that choice of 2, they feel involved. They feel like they have, a degree of decision-making authority because you've given them that choice. So, thinking about that. Prompts and reminders around the environment, so safety signs, safety warnings, auditory alarms, those kinds of things, making sure that you change them and you refresh them, because your reminders just become wallpaper after a while. So, don't have the same sign on the wall for 15 years. You've got to change it and refresh it. And again, your reporting and recording systems. Near miss, we come a lot of problems with organisations that have issues with near miss reporting, because individuals report their near misses and it falls into this black hole and they don't know what's happened. Has any action been taken or not? And if you've reported a near miss and nobody's told you what's happened as a consequence, you're less likely to go and do it again. So thinking about how you communicate back to the individuals that are reporting near misses. Some organisations we've worked with will have things like, you said, we did boards, those kinds of things. So making sure that you communicate that you're taking actions. In terms of the social support, that's about, at the very beginning, making sure you've got a champion, of somebody on the board, somebody that can carry some sway to champion your process. Selecting that individual can be very difficult sometimes. You want somebody that isn't going to railroad the process, somebody that hasn't got their own agenda, and somebody that comes across with enthusiasm and that visible commitment to health and safety. So that can be a bit of a challenge, but again, you will have somebody, it doesn't have to be your CEO, it could be one of your directors or senior management. It just, you have to give careful consideration to who that is. In terms of social support, giving and receiving feedback. Now that's a really important thing. Again, coming into what they do in the behavioural observation programmes, you want to give the feedback, to give the praise and the recognition and the reward for the safe behaviours, because that feedback is what's going to positively reinforce that behaviour and increase the chance of it happening again. And actually what you want is a culture of colleagues feeling comfortable to be able to give feedback to their peers, and that feedback will sometimes be constructive feedback in that you need to do things safely. So coming back to Caroline's thing about, do they feel comfortable of stopping, challenging somebody perhaps. So giving and receiving feedback, that's what you want, a culture of open feedback. Leadership, role modelling. I'm going to talk about that when I come on to competencies of leadership in a minute. So that's really important, having good leaders that walk the talk, that demonstrate that visible commitment. Respected peers. Within your organisation, again, there will be individuals that you could think of that are, it could be the linchpin for you. If Caroline's doing it, it's going to be good, so I'm going to follow her and I'm going to do it as well. There will be those individuals that carry that sway, that carry that influence. And again, a lot of this comes down to good management. It's about managers knowing their team. If you know your team, then you're more likely to be able to spot those individuals. So a lot of this is just good management principles. And using credible educators. So a credible educator is somebody that's trusted, somebody that's seen as an expert, and somebody that can talk to me in my language and in my jargon and that I'm going to listen to. So again, thinking about who would be the appropriate person. It could be, for example, if it's an occupational health condition, it might be that you want to get somebody from Op Health or maybe an external person in to pass on your messages. So just thinking about the credibility. because the research suggests that you can explain up to about 50% of the trust that we place in a message in terms of how credible we perceive the person giving that message to be. So that's really important. In terms of able to happen as well, you want to think about the competence. Now, often when people talk about competence, about giving training and assessing competence, they just think it's in terms of the knowledge and the skills. But it's not. It's just flagging up that competence is very much about the knowledge, the skills, the attitudes and the behaviours as well. So for example, if it's wearing PPE, it's the knowledge of, why I need to do it, what risk am I protecting myself from. It's the skill of being able to don and doff that PPE appropriately. It's the attitude that actually, this is what I should be doing, this fits with my values, this is a good thing to be doing, it's important for me to do. And then there's the behaviour that actually follows it through. So competency is about these 4 constructs, so just to raise your awareness of that. And you should be assessing these when you're assessing competence, not just knowledge and skills. Again, in terms of the able to happen, the capability, that's about knowledge. Individuals need to know it's a risk, and they need to know why it's a risk, why it can harm them, and what are the consequences. So the 70 sign is an example of knowledge is necessary, but it is not sufficient for behaviour change. Because how many of us know exceeding 70 is a risk, whether that's you have an accident, you get caught by the police, you get points on your licence, whatever it may be. We know it's a risk, and yet we still speed. So knowledge is necessary but not sufficient. And in terms of knowledge, you want to be equipping them with the knowledge of, as I said, of why it's a risk to them, what the consequences are. What the consequences are not only to themselves, but also potentially to others around them, to their peers, potentially even to, to the consequences to their family, to their loved ones if they have an accident, an injury, whatever. So knowledge of the risk and the consequences. And just another one to flag up, because again, quite often we find organisations are quite good at imparting knowledge of risks and consequences, but it's thinking about knowledge sharing, so passing knowledge on, so organisational learning. So knowledge sharing techniques, knowledge management techniques are really good for that. So do you have any kinds of knowledge sharing techniques going on in your organisation? What have you got in place to learn from each other, to learn from other organisations, perhaps in your own sector or even out with your own sector? So knowledge sharing is really good as well, and for imparting that knowledge at a more organisational level. Able to happen skill. So again, what we often find is organisations are really good in terms of providing the job specific skills and providing the health and safety skills, donning and doffing of PPE, but not so good at the softer skills. So things like communication skills, listening, that's a skill. How do you show somebody you're listening, for example? So thinking about those, giving and receiving feedback, that's a skill as well. Assertiveness. So again, if you want a culture where employees feel comfortable to stop work, then actually they need a degree of assertiveness to be able to do that. If you lack confidence, then you're less likely to actually speak up or to challenge your peers or your managers if you see them behaving unsafely. And assertiveness, despite my husband's protestations, is not about being rude or loud. It is a skill. It's about feeling comfortable. It's about knowing when to challenge, what to say. So, and you can give your workers and your managers skills training in that. And self-efficacy, that's an individual's belief in their ability to carry out a behaviour. So, again, that's really important. If your individuals don't believe that they have the necessary skills and knowledge to be able to protect themselves, then they're less likely to engage in that protective behaviour. So what do you do to reinforce that belief? What do you do to build their self-efficacy? Sometimes things like, again, using job analysis or task analysis, breaking it down into simple steps, because being able to break it down into small, achievable steps that you can then build on will boost self-efficacy. Success increases it and failure decreases it. So there are things you can do for that. Leadership competence. So again, if you think about the competence of your leaders, what you want is that visible commitment, that demonstrable commitment. And you want leadership competence around the areas of being fair, being a good communicator, motivating and inspiring their workforce, having a vision for health and safety. And these are health and safety specific leadership competences. You get generic leadership competences, but actually there's been a lot of work that's been done by bodies like CIPD and indeed ourselves for the Leadership and Work Involvement Toolkit that has looked at health and safety specific leadership competencies. And again, on step 4 of the toolkit, we have a leadership check tool that can allow your managers to assess their health and safety competence. So that's something else that you need to be thinking about building. Equally, you need to be thinking about how to build employee competence as well. So, and these are just some of the range of things you could be doing. Team building days, networking opportunities, helping to build individual resilience, again coming back to help them achieve successes, see opportunities for growth and development, have decision-making authority, feel involved, feel supported. All these sorts of things will build resilience. And I would also say, in addition to your sort of organisational values, again from our experience, those companies that develop team values are really good because that helps to build your team cohesion and it helps to create that actively caring environment, which is what you want. Okay, so the last step is the want to happen. That's the think it through, so in terms of the plans, the goals that we set ourselves and the beliefs and the attitudes and decisions we have. So I've already mentioned about plans, about the implementation intentions, those mental plans that we formulate, that the evidence shows that if you make those plans, you're more likely to succeed in changing your behaviour. If you think about people that are giving up smoking, you know, if they think ahead of time what date they're going to give up on, are they going to go cold or are they going to use nicotine patches, when are they going to have to get them? If you plan it out, you're more likely to succeed. And the same principle applies to any behaviour. In terms of the beliefs and the attitudes and the decisions, what you can use to change your attitudes and your beliefs is persuasive risk communication. So just some of the tips for persuasive risk communication. So as I said, a credible source, think about who's delivering your message. Using a story approach, people don't just like numbers and graphs, they like a bit of context, they like a bit of meat. So things like case studies, those sorts of things. Think about how you can relate it back to make it relevant to your organisation, to the tasks and the jobs that your individuals are doing. Tailoring it, so making it in the appropriate language, the appropriate jargon. And a two-way dialogue. Again, in the spirit of that worker involvement, often persuasive risk communication can be about correcting misperceptions that individuals have. If you don't have that two-way dialogue with them, you're never going to get to grips with what their beliefs and values are. So you need to have that two-way dialogue. It's not just sit down and listen. Okay, in terms of personal susceptibility, this is just one example. I did some work in the motor vehicle repair industry, and again it was guys not wearing their RPE. And this is just really simplistic. What you want to do is raise awareness of that personal susceptibility. Unless we think that risk could happen to us, we can ignore it. And this is just, you know, that's me on the left-hand side doing that job, and that could be me in 10 years' time if I don't wear my RPE. We've had organisations that have taken this away. You can adapt this for whatever behaviour. If you can make that person on the right-hand side identifiable, recognisable, that's Joe, I work next to him, then that's going to have more impact. Okay, another one that you can do in terms of personal susceptibility is what's called anticipatory regret. And that's about getting individuals just for 2 or 3 minutes, and this is a quick win, just in a safety briefing or a toolbox talk, get them to sit down and think about, if I took that risk, if I climb up that ladder and I don't clip on my fall arrest and I fall off, what could happen to me and what would I regret? I'd regret not taking my kids to the park on a Sunday morning or not being able to play rugby on a Saturday. Whatever it may be, it has to be something that's personal and individual to that person. And what we found is that some people get their workers to do that, put it on a little credit card and laminate it and put it in their overalls, and they carry it around with them. So that's a good one. Just very quickly, I've got 5 minutes left. Want to happen is in terms of the subconscious drivers, so those automatic influences on behaviour. So mindfulness, that's a new one that's coming out for health and safety, so I'd advise you to have a look at that. That's a heightened awareness of your present moment situation, so it's an awareness of your emotions, your sensations and what's going on around you. So studies are suggesting that it can help to increase vigilance and things like situational awareness. So that's one that I would encourage you to have a look at further. And then techniques like police drivers use, like think aloud. So but when they're driving, they're actually thinking out aloud, they're spotting the hazards. I've got a corner coming up in 50 yards, I've got a right turn in 100 yards. Doing that, again, because that's taking that unconscious behaviour into the conscious action. And one top thing they say about that is if you're talking too fast and you're reaching the hazard before you're on the hazard whilst you're saying it, then you're driving too fast and you need to slow down. So think aloud technique's a really good one. A nudge is essentially, it's a gentle push to improve behaviour, but without restricting choice. So it's ways of designing the environment, designing rules, guidance in a way which will nudge the individual towards compliance. It only acts on that automatic system of behaviour. It can give you some quick wins. It's not suitable in every case. So you'd have to combine it with other tools. But just an example, so for example, discounting, we know that people process information in predictable ways. We make predictable errors in our thinking. And we know that one of them is we discount very heavily to the here and now. What's going to happen to me today is more important than what's going to happen to me in 2 weeks' time. So for example, if I was to offer you a medium chocolate cake right now, or a large one in 10 days' time, most of you will take the one now, because it's here, it's now, I can see it, it's definite. So in terms of discounting, that's about raising awareness of the health and safety impact on the here and now. So things like biological monitoring is really good for that. That's your blood results, your lung function tests right now. So making the consequences, bring them into the present day. Again, loss aversion, so we know we're averse to loss. So framing your messages in terms of what could be lost. So by poor health and safety performance. Not just for your individuals, but also for your managers as well. A fair culture, that nice, caring, safety environment, we know that kind of environment nudges our behaviour as well. Social norms, so again, we know that we want to do what everybody else around us is doing. So rather than saying 20% of people didn't comply with health and safety last month, say 80% did. We want to be with the 80%, not the 20%. And then commitment and involvement. So whatever you can do to make them get committed and involved in the process. Again, that's using the social environment to nudge. Okay, so just a reminder. So what you want is to cover those myriad of influences, the physical context, the social context, so that's giving them the opportunity to carry out the right behaviour. Then you want to give them the capabilities in terms of the skills and the knowledge, and then you want to act on that motivatory system, the want to happen, the unconscious and the deliberate system of behaviour. Okay. There is no silver bullet, as I said, unfortunately. If there was, somebody would have found it by now, I'm sure, and would be sunning themselves in a Caribbean beach somewhere. I certainly haven't found it. So there is no silver bullet. What you need is that multifaceted approach. Making sure that your context is right. So the safety climate tool is a brilliant starting point to assess at which point you should be coming in, the areas that you need to be focusing on. Commitment from not only your leaders but also your worker involvement. The experience suggests that that's absolutely vital for it. And there are some quick wins, so things like the anticipatory regret, changing your posters, the nudges, that can be a quick win, but you need to be in it for the long haul. Thank you.